These days, it's hard to find an explanation for what insanity is, but it's even harder to get a definition for what sanity is. Because what we're seeing play out is so much insanity that's being called sanity, to the extent that when sanity shows up, it's being seen as insanity. So, how do we stay sane in a world like this? Insanity is really such a disconnect within a person that they lose their sense of awareness. When the individual is governed by external judgments and worldviews and projections, to the degree that they forget who they are, and they're not grounded in a sense of autonomy, because that autonomy is what's required to create true sanity. The way that sanity can be felt within yourself is as a sense of your own energetic awareness and discernment. When you know that there is a need for all of us to question and understand what is deeper than just the surface level projection that we're often fed. However, since most of us from an early age are programmed to just swallow what we are told and taught and shown, we end up buying into so many different illusions and never questioning that what we were fed in the first place was the truth. What if it wasn't? What if the majority of what you think you know is built on your conviction in that being true, which is why you feel very satisfied with what you know and don't even want to challenge it yourself? Because think of what would happen if that wasn't actually true. Maybe you would feel like your entire world begins to crumble. Maybe you enter a sense of complete lack of control, where your identity's crumbling. You feel rage because you now realize that you were gaslit into accepting a reality that is actually different than what you were shown. What if much of what we have been taught about history, about the world structures, about what's playing out outside of us is built on that conviction that we're not going to even need to ask the deeper questions, and that we're now going to live in this automatic mode of consuming the externality and not even testing within ourselves whether or not that is something that creates resonance. Because once we become these beings that are receiving the inputs without even questioning whether or not we should be allowing this energy and awareness to infiltrate our fields, we've lost our sense of autonomy. And that autonomy is what's critical, especially in a time when a lot of these projections, illusions, and beliefs are going to start to crumble, which is going to reveal the status of the self beneath it. So I want you to imagine what would happen if your identity would be opened up like an accordion and you would start to see all of the different elements that have gone into the creation of yourself as you know it. This self, of course, is your limited I. It's your egoic avatar, you on this timeline, undergoing certain circumstances and events that you can consciously tap into and remember. This isn't your soul self, not that higher dimensional awareness that allows you to actually feel a pervasive sense of who you are as a spirit essence. So when you're looking at yourself like that accordion of different experiences and emotions and behaviors and perspectives that have also been projected onto you that allow you to witness who you are in this time-space matrix, what if you would start to see that many of those things that you have observed and experienced are actually confining you to a separate identity that isn't what your soul actually is experiencing? Maybe what you are now stubbornly attached to, including various aspects of your external reality, your work, your achievements, the way people see you, how you've come to interact with yourself in reality. What if all of that is actually taking you away from alignment with your soul's coherent strategy and how it is that you would need to relate to yourself in order to feel most authentic and at peace in the world? But you wouldn't know this if you were just going about life, taking in everything that you've ever been taught and told and made to believe about your role as a human being. The only way to even start to entertain a more spiritual perspective on yourself is to start to question, who am I really? What if these things that I've amassed as achievements and possessions and archetypes and the ways that people have come to see me as a separate being in this world are not actually an accurate representation of who I am as a vehicle of consciousness? And what if a lot of these things that I've come to know and to see about myself are also partial truths? Maybe they're built on expectations and distortions coming through the lens of a limited identity. And now imagine what would happen when you start to apply this kind of perspective to a 360-degree reevaluation of your life and the world around you. Once you create distance from this chosen identity, which is really a self-concept that has been created by you and by others, through which their perspectives have caused you to buy into a specific version of yourself. And maybe when you create distance from that, you start to see how there's a lot of other misconfigurations that are present in the world around you. You might start to subtly feel where people are not telling the truth even though they say they are. You might start to see where people aren't being authentic, where their body language isn't matching what they're speaking, or where what you're hearing doesn't feel coherent, whether it's coming from a news source or from social media or from your boss. It could be in any situation in which you start to silently question the external authority structures. And you sense, maybe, that incongruency that I'm feeling is actually a deeper truth than that systemic structure wants me to let on to. And imagine what would happen if you now start to trust yourself more than what is being told to you. Now you're experiencing yourself as part of a separate reality than the reality that you're even a part of. Because you, in a field of autonomy, actually have the agency to decide whether or not you're going to trust everything you hear, buy into everything you see, and allow yourself to fully receive the energies that you're exposed to, as opposed to seeing them, sensing what's going on beneath the surface, and then deciding what is in highest alignment with you, and then responding accordingly. When you can allow yourself to indulge in this powerful act of reclaiming your autonomy, you're going to feel like you are in the matrix, so to speak, letting yourself feel immersed in reality and feeling like you have access to even more ways of understanding people, handling yourself in complex situations, and also not necessarily emotionally reacting to everything that happens to you, because you're simultaneously also outside of that matrix structure, because your emotions aren't entangled with what happens in the matrix. You are kind of outside of a simulated reality because you've claimed your soul's reality. And from the soul's reality, you actually have choice. You actually have agency, and you have the sovereignty to decide whether or not everything that happens to you will be applicable to your emotional and energetic experience. And also, you have in this space of claiming your deeper soul's autonomy the freedom to experience things with a lot more sanity. Because guess what? When things unfold in a way that creates an insane condition for people that are enmeshed in the matrix structure, you, having reclaimed your awareness and sanity within the domain of your soul's truest state of being, won't be as reactive, won't feel like things are out of hand, because you will be in your own hands, feeling the comfort of self-trust, inner gnosis, and being able to understand the deeper lesson of why certain things are happening and how you can prepare yourself to be more aligned when they do. Our world is designed in such a way that there is a reliance on attachments, structures, control, being tethered to different systems and ways of essentially externalizing your power, your truth, and even your connection to reality. Because a self-sourced connection is one of the rarest things these days, and in my opinion, one of the most prized commodities. Because if you can cultivate within yourself the one thing that no one can take away from you unless you first give it up within yourself, then you're actually going to be free. And you won't even wonder what's going to happen if something gets taken out of my hands, if I lose something that is very dear to me, if somebody wants to manipulate me, or if something happens in a way that seems out of control. It's only a kind of suggestion from your soul, allowing you to see where you need to pivot to allow for the sustenance of your autonomy. So this is the critical condition. But when you don't feel that kind of state, that is a sign that your body and consciousness and soul field is reflexively contracting to bring you the awareness that there is something amiss in your externality. That's a choice at that point. Will you stay in a situation in which it's warranted for you to now be more cautious? If that doesn't happen, your mind is going to override the knowing state. It's going to tell you everything that you need to think to know something different, which is why knowing is an extremely subjective dance of opinions occurring within you. For instance, you might want to think something so that what you are attached to as a state of knowing is something more convenient, more palatable. And so I think many people, they override their innate knowing to trust from a deeper place and to listen to all the inner cues that guide them into a position of real soul safety, as opposed to egoic safety. But they don't want to listen because they are convinced to stay sane in this quite insane world is to allow yourself to be skewed and to move into a certain place where conformity is to be achieved. I want to remind you a little bit of the dark side of conformity in case you haven't already heard of these infamous psychological experiments. In the Ash experiment, individuals looked at different lines to assess the most simple kind of conformity phenomena. When shown the opportunity to match one line with the length of one of 3 lines, will you choose to take the obvious answer, or will you instead be skewed when you see other people choosing the obviously wrong answer? And to the amazement of the researchers, most individuals made the wrong decision. They chose to move into the lane of conformity because they thought something was wrong with them as soon as they were exposed to the opposite reaction. Another example is the Milgram experiment, where a participant had to deliver a set of ultimately lethal shocks to a test subject who was an actor, put in a simulation to see what would a human being do. Would they stay sane and trust their moral senses and give in to the deeper knowing that they can't administer a lethal shock to someone when guided to do that, even if a researcher tells them it's safe to do it and they have to? Or will they ultimately just go along with the protocol? And the scary result was that most people did in fact deliver that lethal shock. Now, of course, it was just an experiment, but it shows how all human beings are on the verge of insanity when exposed to situations in which conformity is a potentiality. So we have to all ask ourselves, do we have that part of us actually in check? Are we assessing how far we are from losing our moral ground, from choosing to do completely unethical things, and moving in the direction of just agreeing with something that is obviously wrong, if we weigh that decision next to our deeper soul-level judgment? That's where we can sense if something is off, we're going to feel a part of us contract. It's that fear that was written on the foreheads of all these subjects in the tests, in the Ash experiment, in the Milgram experiment, in the Stanford prison experiment, in so many different psychological tests. It was clear initially that people feel that instability. They're like between parts of their psyche. One part, which wants badly to run away from the situation and not need to make that choice, which they know is wrong. But the other part is already darting in the direction of choosing what everybody else wants them to do, because that part is afraid of being revealed as different, to not feel like a loner, to not feel like one that has been making choices that create that sense of estrangement. And so I want you to feel into if you have that part of your psyche actually integrated, or are you still afraid of judgment and rejection and being seen as different? Because if those things are a pervasive part of your life, then you also have the predisposition to lean in the side of insanity. That is when you give up your sanity in order to avoid looking like an insane one. But as you can now see, that line is really blurred, depending on what direction you're looking from. The essential practice and inner reflection that I think we all need to participate in order to ensure that we are on the side of our own soul's evolution is going into our own souls and actually probing ourselves inside, feeling into our own inconsistencies and sensing, what are we hiding from? Are we trying to run away from ourselves and run into the world, which is ultimately going to lead to an impasse? Because there's no effective way to run away from yourself. Sure, you can run into distractions and spiritual games and ways of living a more egocentric life that entertains you and that causes you to feel temporary peace. But ultimately, and when, reality will force us into the void as a collective consciousness to show us more of what has been suppressed across millennia, what systems have been hiding, what individuals have been fearing to see within themselves. That collapse will be real for anyone who has been escaping their true identity. All those people that have found it easier to find shortcuts instead of really integrating and coming home to their souls will have a forced way of awakening to this realization of their own inner splits. And so why wait until that gets revealed to you by something being taken away through brutal awakening to what has been unhealed, unseen, and unloved, when you can now choose to do the most powerful work of loving yourself and ultimately loving the world around you by choosing to look not through these rose-colored glasses of disillusionment, but to actually take them off and to give yourself a taste of the real reality unfolding within you, to sense where are there split feelings, where is there an inner war of polarities and aspects of you that are doing a number to cause you to feel that your autonomy is something that has to be gained via the external relationships and the ways that you change yourself in order to feel more autonomous. That's illusion number one, because if you think autonomy is something to be gained, you're looking at autonomy upside down. Autonomy is you at square one. It's you in your default state, where you're with your feelings and nothing is compelling you to move beyond them, where you're able to experience the heart of your emotional truth. And coherence is a natural condition because nothing has created the interference pattern to disconnect you from your state of soulfulness. But what creates the interference pattern after that ultimately isn't the way people see you, the way the world treats you, the opportunities that are, of course, abundantly available for you to experience the loss of your true self. The interference pattern is you. It's that part of your psyche that splits and that causes you to feel the internal turmoil, where every time you know you're at a crossroads because a part of you wants to choose that truth, like all those experimental subjects that first had a nagging feeling. They know what to do, but then the other part of their mind shifts into the gear of, don't do it. And so then they falter. They lose the inner tug of war and lean into the vulnerability that wants them to not be seen for their own truth. And that, my friends, is what I think we're all going to be facing more and more. What you know deep down is what needs to be pursued. And if you start to distance from it, you slowly enter a lane in which you're not even sure what's winning inside you. The part that leans insanity because it's leaned into the external world perception and relationship, or the aspect that doesn't know anything but the sanity of deeper feeling, intuition, love, and a higher truth of oneness. So let that be a vow you set for yourself, to move more within than outside you, to trust more what your feelings dictate than to have other people play with your feelings and cause you to judge yourself and doubt what's actually unfolding within you, to choose to question yourself and the world more than you allow yourself to feel questioned by other people and conditions unfolding around you, and to not lose that sacred sense of autonomy which was always yours to experience. And it's what your inner child still wants you to experience the most, because when you can give yourself the freedom to feel that kind of individuality, you start to feel that spiritual immunity that emerges from there. Choose more alignment with your inner world, because that's the only thing that you can truly guarantee your connection to. When other connections get challenged, remember that the most important one lies within. And what the world right now is revealing to us most is our need to do so. Even through the hardships and through the chaos, we're actually seeing a blatantly obvious example that what needs to win is the reality that lives within us.